So thank you all for coming to Touch Tours at TMA today. The first speakers are going to be John Duvall and Dani Moran. And we're really thrilled to have you here at the museum today, of course, I should say that, and welcome. If you see anybody with a badge and you have a question, just go up and they should help you or direct you to the person who can help you. I just wanted to orient people as to where the bathrooms are, because that has already been a frequent question. So if you go out and you are walking towards the Matisse, they will be on your right or left, respectively. The other thing I wanted to remind people was just to shut off your cell phones if you haven't done so already. That would be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, here are our speakers today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Duvall, and I am a docent here at the Toledo Museum of Arts, and some other fellow docents that will be helping facilitate, Karen Hakel and Marianne Muller to the back, and also Dani Moran from the Sight Center of Northwestern Ohio. So welcome, we're glad to have you here. And I think this is a great tie-in following from the David Howe's presentation on using the different senses to help facilitate other needs in the museum. So this one is specific to touch, and it is geared for visually impaired guests. It's a very valuable resource to have to offer to fill that need, to have people come in, and I think it's uniquely attuned to, thank you, to visual literacy, as it allows visually impaired guests to appreciate, to understand, and to comprehend art in the way that they know what to do. So as we're talking, there is a scrolling PowerPoint that just shows some of the visual impairments that people have. Some people think that, if it's a touch tour, that it's complete blindness. And one of the things that it's very important to have people understand is there's different levels of impairments. So each guest that goes on a touch tour is going to have their own unique sets of challenges and approaches to the tour. So like being a docent on any tour, you need to be flexible and understand each person's challenges. So this is scrolling through, so I think there's maybe 5 different impairments. So it's going to show, they're all works of art at the Toledo Museum of Art, so it'll show the work of art, and then it will identify what the impairment is, and then the following slide will show the work of art if it was viewed by someone with that specific impairment. So it's going to scroll through, and then when we get to the interactive part, we'll turn that off because the light is kind of blinding. So we're just going to go through some of the description, the challenges, and then Dani Moran and I will do some sensitivity training, so how to approach someone, how to help someone, to guide them through a tour with their impairments. And then at the end, we are going to take some volunteers, and we've got some objects that can be touched. We've got some impairment glasses, so we're hoping we can get some people up here to be kind of a docent, the guide, as well as the impaired person. So you'll get to actually touch some objects. Unfortunately, it's not going to be Rodin or Pissarro, but you'll get the idea. So some of the logistics of doing a touch tour, if you work for a museum, would be to set up the process. You'll need to work with your conservation committee to get an approved list of objects. Obviously, you're not able to touch anything, so the conservator will give you the list of approved objects. We were on a tour, and one of the approved objects was a small bronze, and one of the people we're touching kind of felt that one of the arms kind of moved a little bit. So by us being able to touch it, we were able to identify that it really shouldn't be touched. So working with the conservation team is definitely an issue. These are better if they are scheduled tours, so they would be just like any of the other specialty tours, the Alzheimer tour or toddler tour. Best if you could call in, because it's also specifically trained. The docents need to go through a fairly comprehensive training program to make sure that they are capable to guide people correctly and with the correct sensitivity, to know the objects that can be touched. So it's best if they are a scheduled tour. And smaller groups tend to work best if you're going to have the docent and one or two people touching a work of art. Say it is Rodin's The Thinker. Too many hands tend to cross, and so I've found that one or two people per tour seems to work the best. Let's see. And we've also kind of realized that, and we'll get into more with this when we talk with Dani, that a pre-discussion can help make the tour more successful, either a phone call or before you start the tour, just to help the docent understand what the impairment is, what their sight history is, whether they were born impaired or it happened later in their life, if they have an idea of color, of if you say, if you talk about line, if they were sighted and then lost their sight, it might, just help you know how to guide them better. So a pre-discussion. Also, we've talked about the length that they've been impaired or blind also affects how comfortable they are being led or approaching art. Some people, think, oh, you're going to touch art. It's a fairly daunting thing to understand you're touching a priceless sculpture or gate or bench or whatever you happen to be touching. So understanding how long that they've been impaired will also help lead to a successful tour. And some of the unique challenges to the touch tours, there is the different levels of impairment, so understanding how they're impaired, what they can see, what they can't, definitely helps. The comfort level, the presence of assistance dogs, something to consider, and should be something that should be asked if they're going to be bringing a companion or using an assistance dog, just to be aware that there's going to be that added person, to say, creature, whatever, that needs to be worked with and dealt with. And the assistance dogs that we've had here have been great, but it's just good to know, to be forearmed as to what's coming. And the specific training for docents, we were lucky enough to work with the Sight Center, and we've also collaborated with the Ability Center of Greater Toledo to have come in. Dani was able to bring in spokesmodels from the visually impaired community, so the docents got to actually work with someone to help better understand the unique challenges of working with someone who is impaired. So if you are from a museum and you are considering implementing a touch tour, which is such a great resource, I strongly suggest you kind of figure out what resources you have in your city. If it's an ability center, working with Dani, I found that there's a lot of resources that I wasn't aware of to help with different impairments. So now that I got all that out of the way, let's get to the fun part. So we're going to work with Dani Moran from the Sight Center, and she's going to work with you, just kind of show you some ways to guide, some of the language to use. And I think Karen Hakel is going to be her model, although she's not impaired. So Dani Moran, thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you have an interest in doing this. I can tell you that from the Sight Center, to be able to work with the museum staff and the docents.
Can everybody hear okay?
To develop a tour like this, to bring this to our community, has been such a really wonderful thing. I know that I have been fortunate enough to participate in touch tours in several different cities. And to come to Toledo and to have these great folks who are willing to learn, to stretch outside of their comfort zone a little bit, and to offer something so new and innovative, and to be so passionate about the quality that's going into the tour and the comfort level and all the consideration for every person's unique set of circumstances has really been a great experience. If you can't find someone in your home city who could be a resource to you, I'd be happy to connect you with the service person from whatever geographic area you might represent. We'd be able to track down someone who could be a resource if you wanted to work with someone to develop these types of things. And here in Toledo, everything is so organized, and they've taken such great notes. I'm sure they're willing to share the resources that they have.
Definitely, definitely.
I don't know how to do this and hold this. Okay. So what I would do first is I would join. Other people talking, there's going to be other, sounds. Someone who's visually impaired may be, not that they have better hearing, but certainly more attuned to using the sounds in their environment for orientation purposes. She might be able to pick up on the hum of the cafe and know, oh, okay, the cafe is in the direction I came in. I came in the north door, so that's north. So there's going to be all these things in the area to pick up on that you or I might just let fade out because it's not information that we need to process as part of our day-to-day, keeping our bearings and knowing where our exits are. So knowing someone's name, and that's why we talked about like name tags. Name tags are a great thing for a touch tour because then I can say, Karen, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Are you comfortable if I give you my arm? Would you like to take my arm? Most folks who are visually impaired should be comfortable with sighted guide techniques. If they're not, it's good of you to be familiar with sighted guide techniques so that you can emphasize what is a safe way for you to guide somebody. You never want to take somebody by the hand and pull them towards what you want them to see. You want to offer assistance and let her take your arm. And by her taking my upper arm, we're kind of the same height. If we were to walk forward, she knows if I'm walking, she's safe because she's right behind me. And she needs to stay just that step right there. If I were to stop, if we were to go through a tight area, then I would come closer. But otherwise, I'm just going to let my hand hang down to the side. I'm going to be comfortable as a guide. And then if I want to turn to show Karen something that's on our left, I will turn left, and she will know to position herself to turn left. If we're going to go through a doorway or a tight space or a crowd, I'll just slide my arm behind me, and she'll know if she tucks right behind me, that she is safe in the space where we're traveling. Even if Karen were a dog guide user, where she had a mobility aid of using a dog for assistance, she would maybe have her dog in her other hand. So we would still all stay in line. And we would all be able to move through the museum safely and effectively. We could even have a conversation talking about, wow, there's a huge group of, school children here today, or there's this beautiful piece on our right that was built into the wall. It's all tiles that individually might not represent anything, but when you put them all together, they make this beautiful pattern. And we would talk about how we can touch the things that are on the list, but that our gloves don't give us the right to touch everything, which is probably an important thing to note. But if you've never walked through a museum with gloves on and been allowed to touch things that nobody else can touch, it's like having the keys to Santa's kingdom. You can go in the workshop and you can touch stuff. It's pretty fun. So what we would do is we would come up to an object, and I would say, if you want to trail my arm, my hand is now at the top. That would be good. So my hand is at the top of the piece that we're going to explore. And we would just, from that point on, I can move myself out of the way. And she knows now that she can use her gloved hands to really explore this sculpture, we'll call it. And she can get as much information as she wants. I might not talk a lot during this time, because at this point, I might be a distraction. And it's interesting to really explore. If it were a sculpture, there'd be so many unique facets to feel and to work your way around it. You'd want to note the size of an object. If this were a really big sculpture, Karen and I might not choose it for our tour because we wouldn't be able to access the whole thing. Or we would have to talk about, is it safe to really reach up and feel something?
And it is important that they be able to touch the whole sculpture, we found. If it's a 10-foot sculpture and they only get to feel the foot and the leg, they don't get, it would be like you looking at a corner of Picasso, or actually that might work okay, of a Rubens, that you wouldn't be able to appreciate the entire work of art. So it is good that they could touch everything. So.
That's okay. So from this point, I would say, is it interesting? Can you feel the different temperature? Does it feel hot or cold to you? You want to talk about things that are interesting that lead to what is the material made of, but you don't want it to feel like a quiz. So you wouldn't say, you wouldn't necessarily say, can you tell if that's bronze or silver or whatnot? Something that made it feel like there's a right or wrong answer. You can say, does it feel cold to you? It's interesting how in the museum, you really can get a lot of information about what material the sculpture is made from just by how it takes the temperature of the environment that it's in. And this is a unique piece because it moves. Most pieces aren't going to move, but if there is a moving piece, you want to make sure that it's not going to come down and pinch your hand or be something that would be startling.
And during some of the tours in the pre-discussion, I would ask them, do you want to feel it, touch it completely, and then we can discuss? Do you want to do it? Some people process things differently, so just asking them, how do you want to explore this? Do you want to do it together? Do you want me to tell you going into it, this is Rodin's The Thinker, or do you want to feel it on your own? So that pre-discussion can really establish the process for you.
And Karen's exploratory skills are good. So she just did something that I didn't predict could happen. Usually, the sculptures are mounted on a pedestal that feels kind of boring. While this happens to be placed upon a stool, and the stool could actually be part of the work. In this case, it's not. So it might be considerate to say, this is just a piece that's on a stool. The stool isn't really part of what makes this so interesting. Do you feel all of the levels that were engraved into it? Can you feel the concentric circles as they go around? What I found was really interesting in doing the tours with the docents is that they used so many terms that were artistic terms that I certainly wasn't familiar with in my training. They talk about things like negative space and about the patterns of things and symmetry, texture. I so enjoyed that. When I was under the blindfold, I found that I was getting so much out of it because those were still things that I wasn't familiar with that really, to me, brought a lot of flavor to the tour. So as a person has a chance to explore the whole item, you've led them safely to it, now you can talk about things. And you can ask, do you have any questions? What about that piece felt really interesting to you? Was that an interesting piece to you? Because maybe it just wasn't.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of shapes. And it goes all over the place. And I think it's a teapot.
It is a teapot, and it's fairly intricate. You think about it's probably fairly old. It would be interesting to know how old this item was so you could talk about it. But it wasn't just functional. It was meant to be pretty. It was meant to have some really interesting aspects to it that made it something that was part of the experience of having tea, was probably having this really pretty piece to have in your space while you were enjoying that moment.
And I think if you are working at a museum, going through the pieces that are approved by the conservators list, going through with an impaired person and maybe yourself and actually feeling things. There's things in our collection that are approved, but they're too intricate, there's too many repeated symbols that it's hard to make sense. So kind of evaluating what works and what doesn't is also a good tool for a successful tour. Obviously, more recognizable shapes are more easily comprehended by fingers, but Karen was on a tour with someone we have a sarcophagus in the classic court, and by touching, she was able to discern what the animal was, which we couldn't do that, so we know that their sensibilities change, so just understanding how the piece can work is a good tool as well.
So you take time to explore the item, and then it's interesting to have a discussion to find out what does that person find is interesting, because that may lead you to having some really great insight into what brought them to the museum. What part of this tour was so fascinating that they took time out of their day and they scheduled their transportation and they got here, and you get a sense of what a person is really looking for from their experience. So they've touched it, they've explored it, you've talked about it. You can talk about what is similar from this item to other items that they may have in their present life. You'll also get a sense for when it's just time to move on. When is a person exhausted? What's interesting about this one? Some people may want to spend a lot of time and do 3 or 4 sculptures or objects in their tour, and some people may be interested. They may spend 2 or 3 minutes on a sculpture and 10 or 15 minutes on a bench. every person that you give your tour to is going to have a different set of interests, just like any of the other specialty tours that a person would do. So Karen, at this point, do you have any questions about that item?
Are there any leaves and vines on this?
I do not believe that there are. Some of the things that you feel may just be indentions into the object. As time has gone on, it's sort of taken on a little bit of a...
So this is not a leaf?
See, not being an art person, I don't have a word to describe that. I just call it like a little point.
Okay.
It's almost like when they created that, they just pulled a little bit up to make a pretty part.
So, and Dani, can you kind of go over the language of when you approach a work of art? Because I know when we get to, most of the sculptures are on pedestals, so just, you know, because you say, okay, we're coming up to something, or it's over here, doesn't mean anything. So if you're approaching a work of art that's on a pedestal, how would you address the approach to the work of art? Because I think that would help solve a lot of anxiety for people as well.
It does help solve a lot of anxiety, and it starts that conversation. So you could say, on our immediate left, there is a sculpture of a teapot, and it's resting on a stool. The stool is about 3 feet high. The teapot itself is about 1 foot tall, and it's mounted securely, although I don't believe this is, but it's mounted securely on the pedestal. It's meant to be included in a touch tour. You can reassure someone that when you explore this with a gentle touch, you will not damage it. You won't be able to knock it off. It's not meant to be, you know, hopefully nobody on your tour is going to try to move things or remove things. They should be attuned enough that this is a privilege to be able to touch the art, that they're really into exploring it, the same way they would explore many, many other things in their environment. Typically, a person with a vision impairment is going to get a lot of information from their hands. They're going to have supplemented a lot of visual questions with information that you can get through touch or through asking specific questions. So they will have that skill set fairly well developed, and it will be a really nice resource to be part of a tour, part of a service where the service is provided to them at the level that they're used to, that it is about touch and it is about exploring with your hands, and that those art words, you know, one of the things that I learned was negative space. So I would say, when you open this teapot, you can explore the negative space. And I think that's really an interesting concept when you're so used to living in a dimensional world where information comes to you non-visually or tactually. To be able to explore the negative spaces of things, it takes it to another level.
Well, I think it is what Dani said. It's a great point just to reinforce that most people will never get to touch Rodin's The Thinker, or, you know, some other wonderful sculptures. So this is very unique and very special that they get to touch the washerwoman Renoir. You can feel his fingerprints in the bronze, and it's just amazing for the docents and for the people that are on the tour. It's just a really unique experience. Do you want to lead her to the next object, just to kind of go over the guiding again, because then we are going to give you an opportunity to either be impaired or to guide.
So I would put my hand out, and I would say, my hand is on the stool if you'd like to take my arm. And if she tries to take my arm or take both hands, I'm still going to lead her to taking my outside arm. You want someone to have their thumb on the outside and their fingers on the inside, so that she's taking my arm just above the crook of my elbow. That's the safest. So that we can see what you're doing. I sure will. So from here, if her thumb is closer to her, so she's like this, on that side, she's going to get as much information from me as I can possibly give her without my using a whole lot of words. You know, I don't have to tell someone I'm going to turn around, because she'll know when I turn. She just knows I turned. I didn't have to describe that. If we were to take a step up, if we came up to these steps here and I took a step up, she felt that I took a step up. So you don't always have to use the elevator. You can ask your guest, are you comfortable on the stairs, or would you prefer to take the elevator? You know, if you're in a part of the museum where you have something directly upstairs, there's a set of stairs, you know, you can keep your tour that way. If a person is comfortable with the stairs, as long as you come into a stairway, and I would say, I would put my arm on a railing. Karen could trail my arm she could reach the railing. She may prefer, do you prefer the railing on your left or your right? Sometimes people have some arthritis or issues with hand strength. They may really prefer one side of the stairway or the other. If they don't have a preference, usually just go with the flow of traffic. So I would put my arm on the railing, and then I'll put it here on the chair arm. You could trail my arm.
With your left hand.
So you could take this arm that you have that you're grabbing my arm with, Karen, your left arm, and just trail down. So you get to where my hand's on the seat now. If you are taking someone to the seat, you do the same thing. Would you like to step up? It would be so much more comfortable. So I'll put my hand on the seat. You can just trail down. There's a seat. That way you don't have to, you would never take someone, and I would never take her and turn her. I would just put my hand on the seat, and she would be able to feel what the space is and turn her body, position herself in a way that's comfortable, and be in her seat. So if a person needs a break, same thing. Just help make sure that your guest is comfortable and safe. Leading that way is so much more interesting that you could keep up your conversation than if you felt like you had to describe everything. Like, here's your seat, I'm going to put my hand on it. She knew I had my hand on the seat. And so if we were ready to get up, I would just do the same thing I would do with any other guest. I would say, are you ready, Karen, to move on with our tour?
Yes.
Let me offer you my arm. And by now, we've worked together, so she knows I'm going to offer her my arm. And when I step down, and I'll usually pause when I step down because I really do want to make sure that I'm safe. If you travel with someone frequently, they're attuned to your travel patterns. You don't always have to pause. We're coming up to our next sculpture. Let's do that. So if I wanted to turn, because I wanted this on her other side, I would just turn in my space to bring her around if we had the space to do that, or I could turn this way. That's a little more awkward. So then it's on her right, and I can say, Karen, if you reach out with your right hand, there's another stool. It's about the same height as the last one. It's about 3 feet tall. And there's a sculpture on it. This sculpture happens to move. So you can actually pick it up and explore it if you want to explore its weight. That may be something that you would be interested in doing, especially because this is a really interesting piece. I'm going to let you know while you're exploring that it is a human skull. It's nobody we were related to. And so some of it is a relief where you can feel the bone structure and cavities that were probably sinuses, different plates of the skull.
Well, something, as Karen is feeling, something that Dani talked to us about, that's along with different forms of impairments, that a lot of impairments could be caused by other illnesses or other disabilities. So understanding and asking those questions, are you in a wheelchair? Are there any other impairments that we need to know about, can also help lead to a successful tour.
It's a good balance. You don't want to get someone's entire life history because you wouldn't do that on any other specialty tour. So just make sure that for every question that you ask, you are going to be getting information that you're going to use to then effectively plan a really meaningful tour for a person.
Right.
So you wouldn't necessarily have to ask what caused your vision impairment, but
No,
knowing if
right.
they've ever seen color, that makes a tour so much more interesting. And you can ask a person, do certain colors remind you of certain things? Because some people who are visually impaired have associations with color, and other things that they know that they've learned in the environment are those colors. And so those types of associations can be really interesting to delve into, especially from an artistic point of view.
And we're also moving forward, we're refocusing on the touch tours, so we're exploring some other ways to make it successful. We've talked about the scale of works of art in the Great Gallery, so maybe finding a length of rope that we could lay on the floor or they could hold, so they could get an idea of the expanse of some of the works of art. Some of the impaired guests have asked, they wanted to touch a painting, which unfortunately they can't do, but if we could have some examples of even just the frames, how ornate and wonderful and chunky these frames are, that would be valuable, that they could at least touch a frame. So continue to explore different ways and of helping the senses. I've considered, and I've done a little work with an olfactory tour, so the sense of smell and how that reminds you. That might be, I know there was a touch tour program in Washington, and they have implemented smell into the tour as well. So you're not limited but to just touching.
Well, there's interesting things about painting. It might be interesting to feel a watercolor as opposed to something that was painted with an oil paint, so that you get the idea of the depth. But that is something that could be done. It could be produced for your tour.
Right.
That wouldn't have to be something that was particularly valuable. It's just a learning tool, because that does give a person the sense of the different genres of art and the different time frames that things were developed and the age that some things are, and the colors have remained so vibrant. You know, that sort of makes it interesting. Is there anything that you found particularly about this piece, Karen, that you'd like to talk about, or that you had a question about, or that was meaningful to you?
Well, it seems that this is not just the skull, because there's a divide in the middle here. So is there skin on this side?
It's interesting because there's not skin. It actually looks like the membranes, and that you're seeing where blood vessels are and where soft tissue is and where cartilage is. And it's really a learning tool as well, because one side has an ear cavity and one side actually has the skin from an ear. And so you get a sense of what's sort of behind the scenes. You can feel teeth from the side where there are no lips. This might be a tool that an artist would use to actually help with sculpting with size or with dimension, or with creating something that had those layers that make a piece totally interesting. The other thing about Karen exploring is Karen has explored this piece while I'm standing here just talking right in her ear. It is nice to have some quiet time in a tour, so that a person, it's the same as when you look at a piece of art and you just reflect upon what makes it beautiful, or what it reminds you of, or what just makes it meaningful. It's the same thing on a touch tour. And that's why limiting the size is really a good idea, because you don't want to have too many people asking questions. If someone really has the pleasure of taking the time to explore this, they're probably going to be so excited to be able to do that, that they really want the time to be able to focus and explore and learn. And doing that in a quiet setting is oftentimes much more peaceful than doing it with someone talking right in their ear.
Right. And you will learn things as well. I was doing the Rodin's Thinker with a completely blind guest, and they really focused on the clenched toes kind of wrapped around that rock that I've looked at, I've close looked at, I've done visual literacy, but the intensity of those toes, she was like, wow, these are some serious toes. And so they're noticing things that even with your looking that you won't notice. It's incredible.
It is, and it makes you think, like, what kind of a setting am I in when I'm going to clench my toes all up? Am I nervous? Am I upset? It's certainly not when you're relaxed. So it gives you another way to attach some meaning to the piece and to what the artist was trying to convey.
Does anyone have any questions concerning leading or guiding? And yes?
How much training does it take?
For the docents, I think we had 2 sessions with Dani and an impaired guest, and then we had the docents pair up and kind of go through on their own, one impaired, one leading, and then they would switch. And I think they did that at least 2 different sessions for at least an hour. And then if it's been a while since they've been on a tour, we do a refresher. So, and then the brochure that Dani was kind enough to bring really gives a good overview as to language and approach and respect and sensitivity as well. So that's a great resource as well.
One of the best things you can do is to either close your eyes, like Karen's so kind to do, or to just go under a blindfold. Even working in this field, I find the work that I do under the blindfold, it really brings back exactly what I need to hone in on to be effective as a teacher. And there are people who are orientation and mobility specialists who have also lent their time to the museum to talk about ways that we guide. And the sighted guide portion of it, it takes much less time to learn how to be an effective sighted guide than it does as a visually impaired person to learn to travel and navigate your environment independently. And that's just your role. You just want to be a safe guide so that a person can have a carefree, wonderful experience in the museum and really focus on the art and not just on how they're getting. Someone who has a dog guide may just prefer that you walk and that they follow, and that they have those skills that they have been trained that their dog will follow. If a person has some remaining vision, they may not prefer to go sighted guide. They may also prefer that you walk, just one step ahead and that they know that they can follow.
Is there anything specific you can tell them about working with assistance dogs?
You would never be in a situation where you, as a tour guide or as a docent, would ever have any reason to interact with the dog really at all, or any kind of a service animal. And actually you really shouldn't. The person who has the assistance of their dog has a very special relationship with their animal, their service animal, and they've gone through probably fairly extensive training. Some schools are 6 weeks where you stay away from home and you work with the handlers and you really learn and build a relationship with your service animal. So that would be something that your guest would be fully in their responsibility. You just want to make sure that you are comfortable with that in the space, and then if you have another guest, if there's two people who are visually impaired, that they are both attuned to where the dog is at in the space so that everybody is safe. And so you can say, oh, Karen, I see that you brought Molly, your assistance dog. If Molly's on your right, I'll have John, who's our other guest on this tour, I'll have him always stay to your left, so that if Molly's always on your right, then he has this whole area to explore and his space is safe as well. So you've just established the parameter for that. If someone happens to bring a service animal to your environment and it's not a well-trained or well-behaved service animal, I think that's a really fair thing to address with the guest. And I would say, Karen, it appears that Molly is pretty frisky today. She's really exploring things, and her feet up on that pedestal are making me fairly nervous. Yeah. That's a fair thing, because that should really not be happening. And if it is happening, you don't want anything to, take any risk that would give the museum a reason to feel that the tours are not in the museum's best interest too. So you'll just be able to handle those things probably respectfully, but it's okay for you to address Karen regarding her service animal. You just don't want to address the service animal.
Right. Excellent point. Yes.
I would like to ask from your experience, is it possible to talk with blind people about a conversation beyond the recognition of the physical aspects of the object and about the artistic aspects?
As far as like analysis and interpretation, is that what you mean?
Beyond the first.
Definitely, and I think that comes in with visual literacy, is understanding, identifying, and then getting into analysis and interpretation. When I mentioned about Rodin's The Thinker, and she identified the toes, and so we had a conversation about what do you think those toes mean? And so we got into some interpretation, and she was able to identify how furrowed his brow was, and what emotion, what does that say to you? So I think you can definitely get into analysis and interpretation. But again, like Dani said earlier, just so they don't feel challenged or tested.
I think you'll sense that from your guest as well. I have a coworker who's totally blind, and he's done quite a bit of sculpting. He's very interested in different materials that you can sculpt with, and how things can be represented from a literal standpoint or from an artistic standpoint. And so he would be somebody, if you had on a tour, he has a pretty deep background in art. So he would be someone you could definitely have those conversations with, because that's definitely in his area of knowledge. You might find someone who didn't know that was a passion that they had, and doing this tour might really make them realize that there are things that they're accessing in a different way than they ever did before. But it opens doors and it creates opportunities, and maybe where someone couldn't feel like they could express themselves as a painter any longer. Maybe they realize that what they are passionate about is now sculpting, which is a very tactile thing. You know, I would imagine that most artists start with the idea of something in their head that they struggle to create in the world around them. And a person with a vision impairment has so many life experiences on a day-to-day basis where things are visualized in their mind that transferring that to something that other people could enjoy as well, that might be something that, depending on the guest, that could easily be represented in a discussion in your tour.
So I want to make sure that we have enough time to do the interactive part, so I think we're going to move on to the final segment. Karen, you can open your eyes if you wish. Thank you. So what we have some impairment glasses, so we're just asking for volunteers. Hopefully we'll get an even number, so one person will be an impaired guest at the museum and one person will get the opportunity to guide them. Who's willing to volunteer? Okay, all right. If you guys just want to come up to the front, we have gloves. You can get the full experience, because even you're touching something with latex gloves, you're going to lose a little bit of your natural tactile sensibility. So it changes things a little bit. Who else would like to participate? Nobody? It's not, and these aren't actual works of art. Some of them are everyday objects. Some of them are artistic. So I mean, they are works of art, but they're not. You know, it's not a Picasso or anything, unfortunately. You want to come up? Okay. So what we'll do is we'll impair the one guest. So and then we're going to reveal the objects so they don't know what they're looking at. And these are they're different levels of impairment. Some are glaucoma, so the vision is very blurred. And there is, I don't know if we have any, do we have some total blindness as well?
Am I impaired?
No. Okay. Okay, and that's fine.
Docent and the impaired person, so. I'm not
Yes,
sure which-
yeah, everyone needs to.
I don't know what
What
I am.
size gloves would you like? Let's start with that. Medium?
Yes, yeah, it's okay to take pictures, isn't it? Yeah, sure. All right, so we've got two groups. Does anyone else want to participate? Okay. No pressure.
Okay, are we going to give gloves to the guides?
Yeah.
Yes, yep.
So,
Who needs gloves?
Do you want to have the
these all the
simulators?
same?
I think these are different. So let's do that one. And see if I can find.
I know there's some in the box, John,
That are
Dark.
okay. Do we have two groups?
There you go.
So go ahead and put on your glasses.
It's hard. Just take the glasses out before you put the gloves on.
Okay. All right, now we have a docent and a visitor. You're the docent?
I guess so.
And this
I'm not wearing
gentleman
glasses.
is our visitor with his glasses on. And Karen, you're the docent or?
Yep.
I'm afraid
Oh,
I'm
you're
impaired.
You're the impaired.
She's
Okay.
impaired.
Okay, you'll be your docent.
No, no, he's impaired also.
He's impaired also. Okay, let's find
I'm in
one.
a little trouble.
Do they fit?
I don't know. How are they supposed to go?
They kind of hook over your ear.
Under my hair?
Yes.
Yeah, probably.
Oh.
We have
This is
more
hard
like
to do with gloves on.
sunglasses, if that would work better.
Might be a little big. I can,
No, that's okay. Don't fine.
Oh.
Okay, let go.
He's going to stay on.
You're going to use your hands. There you go.
Okay. Should have
All
blue
right,
in the
so
middle here.
the docent should.
Right in my nose should be blurred, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so do you know who's the docent and who's the guide?
Do I have a docent?
Everybody has name tags, so maybe you could
Karen,
introduce
do you wanna be-
yourselves.
Do you want to be one of the?
Karen?
Yes, yes, okay.
Be your guide?
So should I be your guide?
I can actually see.
Introduce yourself.
So I'm Becky,
okay.
part of the Ben. Okay, so I'm gonna take. I'm Karen.
I don't know what my impairment is, but I just see
Thank you
in the middle. I don't have peripheral.
You're gonna want to take,
What kind of,
Yeah, where it's just
I'm sorry. You're gonna
the
want to
center of
that
the
way.
frame.
No matter how Becky moves her arm, and Becky, you can hang your arm down, you can be comfortable. No matter how you move your arm in space, Ben should be right attached. Okay.
Yeah, no, we'll
turn,
say,
no,
we'll
right,
say,
turn.
let's
So
say.
go to any of these objects? Sure. You're gonna want to watch out on
I should ask you, are you left
You took your arm right behind you. Go tuck in.
So I'm going to get over on this side.
the second table.
Two fingers and the inside and your thumb onto your inside. And
So you can just
I'm
describe
going
this.
to take a step.
Yeah, and just ask,
So they can hold
ask them
everything.
how they want to feel. Do you want to feel the work of art going to discuss, or do you want to discuss the
Okay, now we're going to turn this way.
And did you leave his hands?
I will put a foot away from.
Yeah, and what you can do
Did you say we're going
is
to
sculpture,
And there's a
sculpture.
and your fingers are getting very close to each
Show
other.
you one thing per hand.
Okay, so you want to feel the other thumb.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, that's good.
So it's
Yeah.
a,
Or if she trips over it on top of her. Sure.
It's not so sure it's going to say.
bigger than I thought.
Okay. It's just considered cheated or something?
This is something that you
It is
can
actually
touch all the way around.
And you can, I guess, people going into it, want me to tell you what it is?
Right, well, that was my question.
Yeah, walk up and say, this is a sculpture to be
Okay.
Or they might say they
Yeah,
want
it's
to.
like,
So,
it's a horn, obviously.
All right, you're right about that,
And
yes.
it's not it's not
yeah,
a,
most works of art you can't see.
Right.
I think it's a saxophone.
Right.
Or
And
close
then
to
at
a
this point, I would
Okay,
say,
okay, you want to keep feeling it then?
an antler sculpted by Pissarro in 1874, and, you know, you can start naming some information, and then you can start asking, why do you think a sculpture would?
You've known what a saxophone looks like, right?
Start discussion.
Or you can say,
Yeah.
are you familiar with musical instruments? If it's not a saxophone, do you have ideas? You know,
Some kind of ceramic.
Right, right. Well, I'm trying to figure out where, I mean, if it's a horn, you need to blow it.
Exactly.
So I'm thinking there would be a mouthpiece over here, and there would
I
also
feel
be,
like this
I
might
don't
be
know
a
enough
nose.
about horns to remember whether they were keys.
And a
So those are the kinds of things that make it interesting.
Right.
If he didn't know it was saxophone, and asking all those questions, that would cause sort of like anxiety.
And your hair.
Like, I don't know what it is, I'm supposed to be able to find it.
Well, I'm
But
still,
you can,
still not sure.
offer a challenge, and say, oh, are you looking for something in particular? And then he would say, well, I know that musical instruments have a mouthpiece.
Right.
And then you know, oh, he's into checking this out. It's like a puzzle in his mind. It's
Right,
not.
yeah.
Quite a complicated,
As the
it's a complicated
side effects, you ever
system
touch it?
to get the whole thing.
And that is
Oh, yeah, and you should, and the nose.
Right, right, the big holes.
Right.
I think sometimes that's interesting
We
too,
do
is
have
to ask,
a
do
washerwoman.
you feel some parts where being gets aged? Do you feel
So
how
we're
it's
both
in
kind
some
of
places
feeling
and
each
other
other.
places sort of feel like, oh, that's been around the block for a while?
She would
I think of that, I would think of Nick's, there's a pump.
So you got to be able to touch and feel and with them, and you can say, oh, you come around to left, or the diagram,
Oh,
you have to feel
this is kind of like another phase.
be involved,
Okay.
engage with them, and that's what you're going to learn so much of as well, because they'll feel safe to do that as well. Do you want to lead into another work of art?
So I guess at this point I would say, what can you tell me about it?
And then tell them you're approaching the work.
Okay, so
Like a headdress, but it's all one.
it is a musical instrument,
Right.
and it is a horn,
Right?
and we still haven't found the mouthpiece, have we?
No.
About it, or do you want to just materials?
I guess I should ask, is there what?
It's something we need to pick up
There's
and
a place where it should
See,
be.
that's what I'm thinking.
It's not attached to the.
Because-
And it's,
I might want to turn it over.
it looks like it's made of. Can you tell?
And this
Oh,
mask,
now
look,
yes.
it's where you're left-handed.
I can see a little.
It's
So there's another,
There it is.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's a light bulb where you're like, oh, I can
Just
see it
looking,
now.
a little bit I can see.
Still not quite picturing this, because it's so complex.
It's
Even feeling it, you can't.
nearly 3 feet tall.
Right,
Probably a foot across.
right.
Oh, I just want eyebrows,
And it's,
So,
I think. Maybe.
well, I was gonna say, if it's not actually a saxophone, which I'm guessing it's not, what is it? Really? Okay. Sorry?
it's a bass.
Ceramic, this is
A
the
bass?
base.
Bass horn, okay. Cool.
That's why I love the museum. I learn something every time.
Okay,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, that's what would tell you the difference.
All right.
Oh, no,
Okay, so
it's a piece like this.
then
We don't have any. No. Small
You did a good
pieces,
job
of
on
just.
yeah, see, that's
Well,
what fingers
you,
do.
they probably that one's
Your
yours.
name is-
You don't really realize that.
I'm noticing that I'm touching it.
And this is where the
It looks like
Right.
it's probably some kind of.
Yeah, you can probably tell I have so much impaired actually. Yeah.
But you got a sense of what the complexities of it are.
Absolutely. I got a sense, right, it was just, again, the air went along, way to get out. I don't quite understand.
So which pieces you appreciate?
Right.
But the antler was pretty neat too.
I think most of the docents here, when they use extra gloves in their pockets, or something, so it kind of really gets a little level.
Yeah.
There's no,
Yeah.
it's a,
And you can really tell them people are
Look at it when you can touch it next door.
right.
See, it's hard to get, if you're trying to follow this. When you come to there, if you can't see it,
Yeah,
it's hard to sort of infer the perspective.
Yeah, it feels really hard to do. I don't just get nervous about saying and air something. I'm trying to use that.
That's an example. This is one of the keys that create the different pieces.
So that's why doing it with other docents.
In college, I was in the chorus, and the tenor stood behind the horns as one particular piece, so I was very familiar with the spit valves. So I was sort of standing in a puddle.
This is something I thought was so interesting that John brought this forward, because I thought, if you started with an object that was so familiar to us, and you can really explore it, you start using language, of, oh, this is from oh, it might be bigger, how does it feel to you? Oh, it feels hard, it's either, is it metal?
So this reminds me of
Questionnaire.
Oh, maybe it's
History.
it's laser, right? It's
You trying to use it as many.
You know, when you have that much discussion before, oh, it's
Much as your distance.
that leads you to opening up those
I
things.
get a search and then I'll have to get a bunch of stuff.
Right. Right, it also gives you more appreciation for simple objects.
Some actual lot of work goes into making it.
lose.
I don't know, I thought that was really interesting.
Well,
Let me see that they
the
want.
gloves are easy, so that's our still gonna have fluid regular and sort of those. So do you have like a sensation? But I used to when you were in the gown and here, have been able to figure things out everywhere. It's just
There's like a museums and blind thing, there's a group in New York, do you know? A reception here to the current.
The center's brilliant people from sight-impaired, so actually we're using the docents today. One of the talks that we wanted to do was to keep the objects concealed so that the folks who were testing it out would have the experience of trying to be able to actually identify what it is. Docents outside of the touch tour.
Turn in my gloves.
We also have, so how did you do?
I mean, was it good? Because I had
Anyone
a
else want to try?
circle, a small circle in the middle, so I could
See the edges.
I was just hungry. I got a
So what do you?
We have partial vision, we have
has been so she
So it's not quite.
unfortunately doesn't live here anymore. She would be right here doing it. Well, except she had a stroke. So she would still do it.
There's little dots in the center, so we
I'll
use
email her and tell her.
Frank and I.
That's what kind of got me interested.
Just that one setting, that's so she can see.
I have taken her shot. I used to spend a week at the Jersey Shore.
So we just have a couple more minutes. Does anyone have any other questions before we? Yes.
So when you conduct the tours, are they normally? I think I did good. Are they in a separate room like?
Oh, that's an excellent question. They're through the museum. They're not in a separate room. So they're from the classic court, ancient Egypt, through Impressionism into Renaissance. So it's throughout the whole museum.
So even though there's other visitors, there might be a school group coming in and they see you and your visitors.
Right, and people will ask, why can't I touch? Well, yeah. And we just tell them it's a special program for visually impaired guests. And we've also had, with our school tours, generally they're asked if there's any special needs students, and for some reason they didn't say that there was an impaired child, and Karen and I happened to be here, so a guard said, we have an impaired student, so we slapped on the gloves and we took them through. So it's listed under an adult tour, but it's definitely geared for children as well. You just need to really make sure that they can still touch everything, and where sometimes their height can be a factor as to what's effective.
And I think, I'm sorry if I can continue. So, and then is there any objects that you do have for students, even though they're not impaired, and just to enhance their tour?
I think when the program originally started, and I don't know if anyone has institutional history enough to correct me if I'm wrong, but that was one of the aspects of the student tours, was that there was, for sighted students, was that there was a touch aspect of it. It's kind of morphed, more focused towards impaired, but I think that's very valuable to have them sighted and impaired to be able to touch something. And Dani and I were talking before this seminar about having an everyday object like a bowling pin to have an impaired guest touch, just so they can kind of release some anxiety about that they're going to go up and touch a Renoir and what the process is going to be. And I think that's a great suggestion. Yes?
I only want to tell that I come from Israel, and we have a children's museum near Tel Aviv, which has a permanent exhibition for the blind.
Nice.
And it's all exhibition is in dark, and the docents
Wow.
are blind people.
Excellent.
So they lead
That's amazing.
the people in the exhibition. So it's
That would be a great thing to do for an exhibition here. Very good. Thank you. Any other questions? Any other inputs before we adjourn? All right, well, thank you very much. And again, if you need any other resources, you can contact the museum, you can contact the education departments, or the brochure that you received has the Sight Center's information, and we'll be glad to assist you in any way that we can. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.